Halfway through this book by Antony Beevor. He depicts the last days of Germany from 1945 onwards, late 1944 November onwards. He talks about Albert Speer and how he was able to have an economic miracle and boost the armaments production of Germany, which, was very much boosted in 1944 as opposed to 1941, 1942. The armaments production they were doing was apparently, according to Antony Beevor's sources, that they were producing 280,000 rifles, 130 to 40,000 armored vehicles. Don't take my word for it. I don't know the exact figures again. I forgot. It's probably in a different chapter 3 or 4. But yeah, like the armaments production, the tank production, everything was going up. But the problem was that there was no oil to move these vehicles. So even if the Germans were able to produce more tanks and armored vehicles and trucks, it doesn't really matter because you need oil to make those trucks usable. Trucks that don't move have no use. The whole point of a truck is to transport goods or soldiers to different areas because it's quicker than walking, right? I mean, come on, that's pretty logical and pretty simple. And it also talks about how the Russians were in a race with the Americans to produce the atom bomb. They didn't have sufficient uranium deposits in Kazakhstan. They found uranium deposits in 1945 in Kazakhstan, the Russians, but there was not sufficient uranium to produce an atom bomb. So another reason why they were racing to get to Berlin so fast was because they wanted to capture the uranium deposits that the Germans had, that the Germans had in Germany. And it talks about really interesting stuff, how that there's a rift between the Allies and the Soviets because the Allies, what were they doing again? Like, there was a lot of rifts between the Allies and Soviets. The Soviets were worried that the Allies were going to have a separate peace with the Germans, and that would enable the Germans to move all of their forces eastwards to attack the Bolshevik menace, right? Like that's how the Germans look at the Russians, the Bolshevik Jewish menace, and the Russians would look at the Germans as Nazis and fascists. They're trying to destroy these fascists. It's really interesting. This book is really interesting. I'm enjoying it so far. I'm, in chapter 11. I think I'm halfway. No, I'm not even halfway. So I haven't finished the complete book, but it also talks about how Hitler was very, very naive when it comes to defense tactics. Like, he didn't allow the Western forces of Germany beyond the Rhine to retreat back to the German border to defend the Rhine and the Ruhr Valley. You see, the thing about the Ruhr Valley is that that's the industrial heartland of Germany. So if the Ruhr Valley was lost, then the Germans will not be able to produce significant industrial output. They would not have significant industrial output to keep powering their war effort. So the Ruhr Valley was a very strategic area to capture for the Americans and the British and their allies and the Canadians and whatever. And it also talks about how Stalin, he would always pit each general against each other so that he would have a better outcome. You see, he had two generals, Zhukov and what was his name? Yeremenko. I don't know. I don't think it was Yeremenko, but it was another guy. You guys can find this out on Google or something. I don't know. But he would pit Soviet generals, field marshals against each other because he would want them to get to Berlin the fastest. He actually asked Zhukov and this other guy. I forgot his name. So, comrades, who is going to reach Berlin first, us or the Allies? Stalin is not a stupid guy. He's very smart. He knew that pitting the generals against each other would enable them to have a healthy competition. Now, this healthy competition would boil down to reaching Berlin much faster than the Allies. And there was a lot of reasons for that. Uranium deposits, they want to make the atom bomb. There's an arms race going on between the Americans and the Soviets. Even though they're allies, they're only allies in name. They're allies because they have a common enemy. But they also you see how after World War II, the Cold War started so fast. You see, the thing about that was the Germans, not the Germans, but the Allies and the Soviets were only allies until they could defeat Nazi Germany. Once Nazi Germany was finished, they have no common goal anymore. They have diametrically opposed ideologies. One of them is communist and one of them is democratic. They can never be fully allies, and they don't have a mutual interest. The British Americans have mutual interest, but the Allies and the Soviets, come on. What else? It talks about how Hitler's very naive. His generals would try to get a separate peace with the British, and it's just really interesting. And it talks about how the Soviets were doing unspoken atrocities against the German women. But the thing about that is, it's hard to feel sorry for the German people, because when these Sonderkommandos and Einsatzgruppen were behind the front lines in Russia, and they were killing thousands and thousands of so-called political prisoners and Jews and undesirables, for special treatment, killing them in gas chambers. But the generals, they knew about this. It was an open secret. Like, everybody knew, but nobody wanted to talk about it. They just put it under the rug. They how you put like dust under your rug because you don't want to clean it. That's how it looked like in Germany at that point. Like, a lot of the Germans, they knew what was going on, but they kept it to themselves. So it's kind of hard to feel sorry for these women that were getting raped and gang raped. I get it, like, that shouldn't really happen, but at the same time, the Germans did worse to the Russians when they were there. There's another thing that was pretty interesting in this audiobook. The Germans, the veterans from the Russian front, when they were retreating back to Germany, they knew that in their minds, only death is the only answer. That is the only thing that's going to come to them, because they knew the horrors and the atrocities they committed to the Russians, and they knew that the Russians were coming back for some payback. What I'm saying? Like, it was pretty crazy, like, what was going on in Germany at that point. Danzig, like, they were killing like thousands of refugees, raping hundreds of women. Women were getting gang raped. It wasn't normal for the Soviet soldiers to rape women singularly. They would rape them in groups, like 9 men raping 1 woman. Like, stuff like this was actually normal at that point. They didn't really bat an eyelid. Considering everything that happened, I can understand it, but I don't condone it. I don't think that that's a good thing to do. I don't think it's the right thing to do. The right thing to do, yep. It's hard to really contemplate the right thing to do. Like, it's war. It's like, at that point, that was a war of annihilation. It wasn't anything like World War One. It was a war of depravity, brutality that's never been seen before in the history of mankind. The Eastern Front was a war of annihilation. It wasn't a war that is, there was no arguing and there was no negotiating with these people. Like, unconditional surrender, that's it. But I'm halfway through. I'm probably going to do another review. This is part 1 of my review. I obviously haven't mentioned everything. The whole audiobook is hours. I can't talk about an audiobook for like 1 hour. But yeah, I'm not.